Welcome to How to Write Good, the writing podcast that is not about how to write. My name is Daniel Poppy, your host. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. If you haven't already, please follow How to Write Good on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you would like to stay up to date with both How to Write Good and everything I am working on, please sign up for my email list. You can find that at my website as well. Again, that's danielpoppy.com. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy, P-O-P-P-I-E, that kind of thing. Daniel, you don't know how to spell it. Going on, what am I talking about? You should check out my book, The Ninth Hour. If you really like The Ninth Hour, this is what you can do to support me. If you have read the book and you enjoy the book. First off, give it a review on Amazon. If you haven't given it a review on Amazon, go give it a review on Amazon. Pause this podcast, go over to your Amazon app, because I know you have an Amazon app, because everybody has an Amazon app, because I don't even open up my computer anymore. I just open up my phone and go on Amazon. Find the book, give it a review. If you hated the book, give it a review anyways. Maybe not. If you moderately like the book, give it a review, give it an honest review. Say, hey, this is what I mean. I'm not going to get offended, because I'm past the point of getting offended at people hating my stuff. Check out One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet. It is on my blog. I might try to make it more streamlined to be able to read it there. It is what it is right now. You can also find it on this feed. You can find it on its own podcast feed. So type One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet into your podcast catching devices, and you will be able to find it. Trust me, you can. You definitely can. That is chapter number 5. It is coming out the 7th of April. Which is kind of crazy. I'm already at chapter 5. Once a month, that's how it comes out, everything like that. The word of the week is prevarication. Prevarication is a sneaky lie, half-truth, skirting around the truth, not answering the question, stuff like that. So if you ever hear the word prevarication, that's what it means. It means a sneaky lie. The word that it comes from means to walk crookedly. It's a Latin word that means to walk crookedly. I don't have the word in front of my face right now, but I believe it is prevaricare, something like that. But if you look up prevarication, you can see the etymology. It's fun. Etymology is really fun. I really like it. I really, really like movements of peoples. I like people out of place in where they are. So there are groups of people in China who have blonde hair and blue eyes. I believe they have blue eyes. Now, actually, I think it's Mongolia. I think it's both. So there are Mongolians with blonde hair and blue eyes, right? They have, or at least blue eyes, right? But there's a group of Chinese people with blonde hair and blue eyes. Really bizarre, out of place. It is a European genetic. I believe they have European genetics in them that allow that to happen. I just think it's really cool. The reason why the Mongolians probably have that is because there was the Mongolian Empire with Genghis Khan and stuff like that, and they took over this huge piece of land that's Russia, and they went and they attacked Europe too. Actually, I believe that Genghis Khan would slaughter whole villages or towns or cities or whatever if they didn't decide to fall in line, essentially. But yeah, so that's fun. So we are going to talk about, besides talking about people being out of place in the world, I think that the Olmec heads in South America are really interesting too. I think it's South America, Central America. So there are these big heads in Central South America, not North America. That's definitely not the case. And they look like they have African features, which I think is really cool. Now, not the people in South America didn't have African features, so at some point, somebody from Africa had to have gotten over to South America or Central America. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it's the Olmecs, if you want to check that out. Olmecs. Olmecs. And now I'm starting to doubt myself that actually is the case. Yeah, definitely. They're definitely African featured, or they really, really stinking look like African. They have African features. I don't know how else you would swing it, really. I just think it's really cool. Check it out if you want to. It just means that the way people migrated, I think it's really, this is a side note for what we're talking about today, but the way people migrated in the past is a really big mystery to people. We don't, we have specific ideas of how people migrated, and we come up with these ideas. We say, oh, this is how it worked, and this is what people did, and we don't know exactly what happened. Thor Heyerdahl, if you've ever heard of him. So he had this idea. This is not related to writing whatsoever, so I'm sorry. He wrote a book. It's called Kon-Tiki, and his idea is that there were people groups from South America that took balsa wood rafts and sailed to the Polynesian islands. And now he said that there were two groups of people in Polynesia. Some of those people came from Asia, right? Or I guess you'd call it maybe Oceania right now. And some people came from South America. So he's like, hey, I want to see if it's the case that you can take a balsa wood raft and you can sail to these Polynesian islands. And the reason why he did it is because these people in Polynesia had stories of people coming from the east, and they came over in balsa wood rafts. And he's like, no, this isn't going to work, so let's try it out. So he mimicked the way they made rafts in South America, and he actually was able to land on an island, which I think is really cool. He did the same thing with a reed boat. He had this idea that, and I don't know how much support he has behind him with this, but he had this idea that there were Semitic peoples who took a reed boat across the Atlantic Ocean from the Horn of Africa to South America. And he got like 10 miles off the coast of South America, which is really cool. It's really cool because maybe there were more people from north, from the old world, what we call the old world, who landed in the new world. Maybe there's more than we expected that contributed to that culture. So they still were tearing out hearts, though, so that's not cool. The Mayans. So we're going to get into our word of the week. Our topic of the week for our accidental essence, and our topic of the week is communication. I've already talked about this in the past a bit. I think it's fascinating that you can communicate with anyone at all. I think that a lot of people think that it is fascinating, and people think, well, how does that work? And you can get down to the exchange of chemicals in your brain, right? So how it works on a neurochemical level is that so what happens is I have a specific concept in my mind, and that concept is encoded in chemicals, to simplify it. That concept is encoded in chemicals, and then I recall that concept, and then I form it into a sound that comes out of my mouth via how your mouth works and how your tongue works, etc. And then that sound represents a specific idea in space that someone else also understands it to mean that idea as well. And they understand that, and it comes into their ears, it gets encoded into their brain, because it is connected to that sound, because a sound doesn't necessarily have to... You can make a squawking noise, and it could mean piano, right? We know that a specific sound doesn't necessarily have to be connected to a word, a concept. Sorry about that, an idea. And I might be using those... I maybe should be using those separately, but I'm not going to beat myself over the head about it. But yeah, so it's amazing that we know that one single word, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that it's connected to an idea, because different languages have different words that they use to convey a specific idea. That is the same idea. Now, the concept is still there. The idea, concept, whatever. The concept is still the same thing. So that would be how someone may explain how it works on a neurochemical level. But I actually was thinking about... I don't know, experientially, I don't know how people communicate. I don't know why exactly it is the case that people communicate the way they do, like how it developed this way or anything like that. I could go back to a fallback, which some would say is a cop-out, and I would say it's kind of a cop-out too, because I'd like to explain it more, is that's how people were made, therefore that's how people are going to communicate. It's kind of the spark of the divine. But I'm not going back to that, actually, and I'm not going to use that as an argument, because people do disagree with me. But I think that there is... So when I was thinking about this, I'm like, okay, so why do we write? So let's focus it in on writing specifically. Why do we write? And when we talk about writing... there is a very simple answer to why we write, and it goes back to what I was talking about before. We write to communicate. And you may think, oh yeah, well that's self-explanatory, of course, or that's a dumb understanding of it. Not understanding. There's a word I'm looking for. I don't know what I'm looking for right now. That's a dumb way to put it, because of course we write to communicate, because writing is a form of communication. We take our words and we put it into writing. Now, I think you can go beyond this though. So if you are writing about concepts, we are definitely writing to communicate that specific concept. If I am reading a philosophical paper and a person is trying to argue that the world is a cube, I don't know why a philosophizer is, I know it's the wrong word, is arguing that the world is a cube, but hey, there's people everywhere. Maybe the philosopher is arguing that the world doesn't actually exist. That's something that intellectual people actually hold. So it might be the case that the philosopher is arguing that the world doesn't actually exist, right? So that philosopher is using words to communicate a specific idea. Actually, the thing about it is that I've noticed is that we try to understand things, and I think there is a logical foundation beneath our thinking that we rely on. I think you have to rely on a logical foundation beneath our thinking, but at the same time, we can create things that don't necessarily exist. You can come up with ideas that aren't necessarily true, which gets us into trouble. We make things that they exist in. It's hard to explain. They exist in some sense of the word, but they don't exist in another. But I think this will connect back to what I'm talking about in a bit. For example, if I write fiction, the fictional world does not exist, but I have to base my fictional world off of something real. So I can't just... the first thing I have to base my fictional world off of if I'm doing writing is the actual way people speak, and that goes back to my first writing rule. Write how you speak. Writing follows language. So that goes back to my first writing rule. So if I write and it doesn't follow how I speak, it is not based off that reality portion of things. Now there's also the logical. I think everything is logic is a ballast. Let me think. Now, from what I understand, I may be using this wrong. A ballast is something that keeps something level, or up. It's up on the water. Something like that. So if you understand it to be that. But logic is what we float on top of. It's our pontoons, or it's the air, the pocket of air that's keeping us afloat. And in writing, if you write a specific story and you make it so, Deus Ex Machina, I'm saying that correctly, that if you don't know what that is, that's when there is something that happens just happens in the story that gets the characters out of trouble. This is actually from the Greeks. So the Greeks had this running joke in their plays where they would have a character in trouble, and then they would have something happen where the character would be suddenly taken out of that trouble. Everything would be solved. This is a really unsatisfying plot device, Deus Ex Machina. The reason why it's really unsatisfying is because when a character solves an issue themselves, the character generally is able to grow really organically in the story, and they're not able to grow if they're saved from something. Kids aren't able to grow either if you save them from everything either, as well. But what the Greeks did, which is really hilarious, is they actually created machines in their plays, and then the character would get into a dangerous position, or they'd get into trouble, and they'd actually have a physical machine. Deus Ex, the god from the machine, I believe that's what it means, come down, grab the person, and get them out of trouble in the play. So it was a running joke, which I think it's awesome that humanity hasn't changed since humanity and how we work has changed in a lot of different accidental ways, extra ways, tangential ways. But in the core of humanity, we're still making jokes, and we still have these running jokes in our stories and what's going on. We still reference stuff, but that's where Deus Ex Machina comes from. God from the machine is saving the person in the story. So now where was I going with this? So we got the God from the machine, and I was talking about this idea of communication. I was talking about how in a storyline there has to be a specific logical flow to the story, and the Deus Ex Machina plot device wrecks that logical flow, because that's not how reality works. So we do have to go back to a specific reality when we are writing. We can't. You can write fantastical worlds. You can write magic into your stories. One thing that people critique, those big old nerds, one thing those big old nerds critique is when there isn't a consistent logic within the story. So, for example, if you have something within a story, these are called plot holes. If you have a specific magical system that you create within your story, and then you break that magical system, this happened in the newest Star Wars. People got really mad at this. What happened is they had someone take a spaceship and use it in hyperspace. So hyperspace is when you drop into a different, I really don't know. I'm just making crap up at this point. Hyperspace is when you drop into a sub-level of space, and it allows you to move through it in a different way than the regular space, right? So what they did in the story is you dropped into a sub-level of space, and then they rocketed the ship into another ship. I don't think that would necessarily work, but that's what they did. And then a lot of Star Wars fans, because they are the big old nerds they are, were like, hey, this doesn't make sense, which, I mean, they have a reason to say it doesn't make sense, because it really didn't make sense, because then what happens to the whole what happens to the rest of the story is you destroy it by having this happen within the story, because it's like, well, why didn't anybody else ever do this throughout the history of Star Wars? This isn't how it should work, because you destroy the story. This is another, since we're on Star Wars, we're staying on Star Wars. This is another thing related to Star Wars, is what they had Luke in the original Star Wars. It's a very straightforward fantasy story, the hero's journey. They had Luke change by the end, and he became the hero by the end of the story. And what you have in the most recent Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, is you have him someone completely different. And I've talked about this in the past. You have to earn what you're writing. You have to earn that plot point, right? If you want a character to chop off somebody's head, you have to earn, and that character is someone really, really what is the word? They're really innocent. You have to earn that right to allow them to chop off somebody's head. Now, in some cases, maybe they react and it goes boop and it just happens, right? So that's not actually their fault. So they're the same character. But if you want to turn them into a really cool, hard-nosed character, you have to actually take the time and be like, hey, this character is going to go through these things, and I'm going to take my time, and that character is going to be a completely different person. The core is going to be the same. Maybe they're going to have some similar problems in their storyline, but they're the same. So you have to have some logic to how you're writing something, and that goes back to earning what you're doing. Now, when I was thinking, I'm like, okay, the purpose of writing is communication. And what I was thinking, to actually get back to the topic at hand, is what is the purpose of creative writing? And I still think it's communication. And I think that this idea of saying, hey, what we're trying to do with writing is communicate, I think that's the best way to understand it. It's really simple, but I think it covers everything else. Now, if you look at poetry, poetry is trying to communicate. You're putting something on the paper and you're trying to convey, in most cases, you're trying to convey a specific feeling, right? In some cases, Robert Frost was trying to convey a specific idea. I think he was trying to convey a specific sensory experience. And he was also trying to convey the experience of nature as well, because he wrote about nature a lot. Emily Dickinson had these aphorisms. If you ever read her stuff, she wrote short poems, and they had these small ideas in the poems, like a little chewable bit of philosophy in each of her poems. Now, I'm not a big fan of Emily Dickinson's poems, but that's how she constructed them. And when you read them, there's something that you chew on, you're like, oh, and then you read it again, you get something else out of it. But what she was trying to convey, she was trying to convey a specific idea, and the best way she could convey it is through these short little aphoristic. Is aphoristic even a word, honestly? Aphoristic poems. Now, that's just poetry, and I think that if you're writing fiction, when you're writing fiction, I think that most people would be like, I really like writing fiction. I really like stories. But I think there's more going on. I think that you're not just in love with the story aspect of things. I think stories can draw you in a lot, but I think as a writer, you're really in love with how the stories you see in real life. Okay. And maybe you'll disagree with me. Maybe you'll say, hey, I don't see this in my life at all. But I'm using this from my own experience. What I notice is when I come up with ideas for stories, they are based on things that I see in the world. Now they are expanded. One ability I have that I'm gonna toot my own horn about it right now is I can look at something, and I can say I can distill a specific idea from that experience or whatever I'm looking at. So when somebody's talking about to me about an idea, I distill kind of the generalization of that idea. It's that's a really uninspiring way to put it. But or if I look at an experience, I don't take that experience as a whole. I don't want to remember that experience in all its little tiny details. I want to remember the core of that experience. And I've talked about this in the past as well, something related to this. So I think that when you are writing, you're not trying to even get all these little details in your writing. You're trying to convey something that you've already experienced, and it probably isn't in your writing. This is why I've said in the past that you should not just read a lot, but you should experience a lot of life as a writer. I think it's going to really help you. Don't be afraid of what's out in the world. Don't be afraid of being a fool. Just be like, well, here I go. I'm going to try this new thing. I think it's something that's going to expand what you know. As a person, it's going to expand your experiences. It's going to make you empathize with different areas. It's going to give you more of a... it's going to take all that crap that you learn. It's going to chuck it into a mulcher. It's going to be mulched down into material you can use. It's going to be fresh and ripe and smell bad. And it's going to be good for writing because you've had all these experiences and you're not trying to describe something in perfect detail. Because what's going to happen if you describe something in perfect detail is the person's going to read. Most people are going to read, and they're going to be like, "Okay, if you actually describe something in perfect detail, you'd write a book about it," because there are books written about specific things. There are books written about cars, right? If you wanted to write a book about a car, one specific model of car, you have a Volkswagen Bug, you're like, I'm going to write a book about this Volkswagen Bug. Well, if you put all the details, all the information about that Volkswagen Bug in that book, you're going to have probably several volumes of that book. So you can't write every single detail, right? You have to take the details that are important. You have to take the details that are important and convey them to other people. But getting back to communication, I think that and I don't want to paint the whole entire group with a brush, but I think that people who are writers are people who have experienced maybe not experienced a lot of life, but I think they experience life differently. And they take all these things in and they love these things about life. And what they do is I think they don't talk about it as much. Maybe they don't have the ability to speak about it as much. Maybe it's too difficult to speak about it as much. Maybe you have a lot of pain, and what you do as a writer is you take that pain and you when I have a difficult time, if I'm nervous, if I'm anxious or anything like that, one thing that really helps me is I direct that into writing and I turn it into something productive. Freud called it sublimation. Right? I think it's a good way to understand it. What you're doing, sublimation, if you don't know what it is, it's when solid turns into a gas it's when a solid turns into a gas on a chemical level, right? Solid is turning into a gas. So if you have ice and it's turning straight into water vapor, not air vapor, gosh, then that is sublimation. Well, Freud took that word and what you're doing is you're taking bad experiences, you're taking how he worked it out is you're taking these carnal urges, parts of your id, and you're turning it into something that is above you. It's kind of like that spark of the divine that I talk about. So it's kind of like, oh, you're creating something out of this. What Freud did is he stopped having conjugal relations. And he pretty much put himself into his work and he said, okay, since I don't deal with all these urges that I had before, or maybe I do deal with all these urges, I'm going to change this energy and I'm going to change it into something that is intellectual, that is above this animal urge that I have. So I think that's what you're doing. I think that people have difficulties in their lives. I don't think it's it sucks, right? Having bad things happen in your life or struggling through something is it's not fun whatsoever. But at the same time, it can make really good art. Van Gogh certainly wasn't a happy person. Van Gogh killed himself, if you don't know that. But he made beautiful art. Now, it might be the case that he just had the ability to make that art, right? He really loved the art, so he sought after it, and he did it. But maybe the actual pain in his life pushed him toward doing something beautiful like that. Maybe the pain in your life, you can actually use writing to communicate something you weren't able to communicate otherwise. I think that, this is the oxymoron about life, or the contradiction. It's a paradox. It's not a paradox in life, but I'm just using the word just because I can. It's an oxymoron. So here's the deal. This kind of sucks. Women are generally better communicators than men, because women generally they're more social than men. They're more capable, they're more connected to their feelings, therefore they're more capable of conveying their feelings than men are. So on an emotional level, women are healthier than men. And you can see this if you look at the United States, because men kill themselves more often than women. Women actually attempt suicide more often, but men do the deed more. I believe men are more prone to, I don't know this statistic off the top of my head or whether this is true, but I believe men are more prone to have addictions than women as well. They're also more prone to risky behavior. That risky behavior might actually be connected to the fact that they don't have as much of an ability to communicate, so they act. But the oxymoron in life, this seeming contradiction, is that women are more capable of communicating, but men need to communicate more. And I think this is true. So as a male of the species, I would say that if you are one, that if you have something difficult in your life, it might be very good to take up writing. And the reason why it might be very good to take up writing is it might be the only way you can actually convey what you're feeling. And you're not even necessarily conveying it in a way that is outright. You might disguise it behind a story. You might disguise it behind satire. But there is a cathartic experience in that allows you to process through that information. And this is how I'm going to end it. This is how I'm going to end this, and I'll jump into our logical fallacy of the week. And we've run out of logical fallacies, so I'm actually recycling some old ones. But this is how I'm going to end it. I think that one of the ways writing is communication, and writing is definitely communication, is by understanding yourself. You can understand other people through writing, but what most people assume is that they understand themselves completely. When you are writing how I'm talking about now, where you have this bad experience and you're using writing to walk through that bad experience, is what you're doing is you're understanding yourself and you're understanding that experience better. You're understanding yourself and you're understanding that experience better, which allows you to move past the experience. In a lot of ways, when you have difficulty in your life, the difficulty comes from not knowing why that difficulty is happening. And you may not get to the heart of why that difficulty is happening, but you may get closer. And because you get closer, you feel like you have more power over what's going on. You feel like you have progressed beyond that, and you can live with it. And you can keep on moving forward in your life and control your life. So you kind of wrest power back from the things that are happening in your life. But yeah, I think that people think they know themselves. And I think a big part of what writers do is they look inward and they look outward, and they look at the interplay. I don't even think it's necessarily looking at themselves. I think they look at the interplay between themselves and the world, or other people and the world, and they're trying to convey that interplay between themselves and the world, or other people in the world. That's all I've got for you right now with communication. I hope it's useful. I hope it's something that's valuable as you're writing. Maybe it's just food for thought. I don't know. I'm of the opinion that if you can get to the basic principles behind things, if you can find basic principles behind things in the first place, if you can find those basic principles, you can actually take them and you can apply them to a lot of different areas, not just one area, not just writing in this case. So maybe it'll be helpful. All right, our logical fallacy of the week is the continuum fallacy. So the continuum fallacy is when you reject a claim that's vague, because it's not precise as you would like it to be. Not just because something isn't super precise doesn't mean it's necessarily invalid. And if you remember, I don't know if I had this on. Well, when you look at arguments are valid based on the solidity of the argument itself. If you break it up into the logical argument, it's if, then, if, therefore, whatever. It's the three parts. The syllogism, essentially. It is the syllogism, not essentially the syllogism. But that's what I've got for you this week. The continuum fallacy. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support me more, what I would ask you to do is that you go to iTunes and you leave a 5-star review. That is something that really, really helps me and helps push the podcast out to different people. And it's something that doesn't cost you much time at all. So if you would do that, I would really appreciate that. And I definitely appreciate everyone who listens to this podcast. If you ever listen to this podcast and you have questions or you have topics you would like me to cover, you can send those to me and I'll look them over and I'll see which ones I think I can cover intelligently. And if you just want to reach out for anything at all, you can do that as well. Thanks for your time. My name is Daniel Poppy, and as always, this is How to Write Good.